Well, hello, this is Bob Odell with Root Source. And we have interviewed a number of different people over the years. I can't say that I can recall right offhand that I have interviewed a pastor. Well, today I'm very pleased to be speaking with not only my friend, Pastor Trey Graham, but Guidon Ariel's longtime friend.
That's right.
And you guys have been friends together longer than I've known Guidon, right?
Guidon and I met in Jerusalem, and I think the year was 2009. So we've been friends since then, growing together, learning together, traveling together. He's been to visit us in Texas, and I've, of course, been to visit him in Israel, and we've been friends a long time,
Wow.
and the friendship's growing.
Wow. Well, I do the math, and so you've been friends with Guidon twice as long as I have, even at this point, after almost 5 years.
Okay.
Well, it's really good to be talking with you. And as I said, we talk about, a lot of our shows are about Christians who have something in their heart, and they have some kind of ministry activity in Israel. A lot of our shows for Jews that are willing to connect with the Christian world. And we're always interested in exploring what God is doing. I think your story is particularly interesting for a number of reasons, but you are a pastor of, tell us what you're a pastor.
Yeah, my church is called First Melissa. We are in the Dallas area in Texas, and the church is 134 years old. And
you've been pastoring a long time.
Yes, I look pretty good for 134, yes. Church is 134 years old. I've been there almost 17 years, and it's grown a lot. The city has grown, the town itself, the area. The Dallas area is exploding, as you know, kind of like Austin is where you are.
Yes.
And the church has grown and matured, and we're trying to love Jesus and trying to love God's people. And so being the pastor at First Melissa is one of the greatest privileges of my life.
Well, let's start with you. Everybody has a story. Where are you from originally?
I was born in Fort Worth and grew up in Dallas. And when I was in high school, my father founded a prison ministry. So that is
Really?
one of the things that he does. It's called Chapel of Hope. And they build chapels inside of prisons in Texas with private funding and then give them to the state of Texas. It's actually unique. No one else in the country does this.
So obviously you grew up in a Christian home, for which I'm sure you're very thankful today.
Of course.
And father and mother, both believers.
Both believers, following Jesus, yes.
And in your early years, did the topic of Israel come up in the home?
Not really. It wasn't a major teaching point within our home. Following Jesus was, and learning the scripture was, but Israel itself, not really.
So walk us through the process. What did you always want to be a pastor?
Okay, good question. I was called to the ministry at the age of 13. I became a follower of Jesus at 13, and soon after that, I knew the Lord had called me to be a pastor. And at age 15, I started.
But
go ahead.
How did you know at soon after 13 that you were called to be a pastor?
Encouragement of other believers, encouragement of people in our church, encouragement of youth pastors. Yes.
Really? What? So they just recognized in you a strength, perhaps, of spirit, maybe.
Yes. The calling, the path that the Lord had laid out for me. People encouraged that, and I began to ask the Lord, is this really what you want? Because it seems to be what other people want. At 13,
you were asking that?
Sure.
That's pretty advanced. Maybe you do have the right calling.
I hope so. I've been doing it a long time. I started preaching when I was 15, wherever they would listen to me, wherever they would take me.
Really? Where does that, where?
Well, there are a few of us now who are pastors of churches in the Dallas area, and our youth minister at the time would encourage us and disciple us and take us to various places, youth groups and churches and nursing homes and everywhere.
Wow.
And we began to teach and learn the mechanics of preparing a sermon and giving a sermon. And it really was the discipleship process in action.
Wow. So what happened when you left high school? Where did you do?
I was planning to go to Texas A&M, the place where the rest of all my family members went, and God had another plan for me. And very late in the game, he opened the door, so I went to West Point and spent 4 years there, and graduated from there and became a field artillery officer.
The path to go into the military, that was unexpected if you were thinking of the pastorate.
Sure, I had a grand plan that wasn't God's plan. But yes, the military was not what I had planned, what God had planned for me. Now I see, looking back, all the skill sets that I learned there, I use in ministry and I use in all the work that I do, but that was very much his plan, not mine.
What's an example or two of a skill set that you picked up there?
Well, in the military, you learn about planning and budgeting and organization and leadership and resource management and motivation and all the skills that leaders need in any field.
Wow.
And I use those a lot now.
How did your parents feel about the decision to go into the military? And what year was this that you went in?
I started West Point in 1990. I was there from 1990 to 1994.
Okay.
How did my parents feel? Mom was not quite as excited as Dad was.
Sounds like a good mom to me.
Yeah, not surprisingly. My father was in the Corps at A&M when he was there. Of course, he will tell you everyone was in the Corps at A&M when he was there. He often says that the college that he went to and the college that my sister went to, both at A&M, were two totally different colleges.
Oh.
One was all male, all military, and one was 30 or 40,000 students and not all military. So he was in the Corps at A&M, then he was in the Air Force after that. So military was not totally foreign to me, but it was not a priority in our family by that time. Mm-hmm. So Dad was more excited than Mom was, but they both wanted me to follow what the Lord told me to do, and that was the only reason I picked to go there, because I didn't want to. I thought that's what the Lord was saying. This is my path for you.
So 4 years, you didn't re-enlist or whatever?
Well, 4 years at West Point.
Okay. Oh.
And then 9 years after that in both active duty and reserve.
Oh, of course, because when you go to West Point, like every year you put in is at least a year in the military, right?
Sort of like that.
Sort of like that.
Yes.
Okay.
You do have what's called a service obligation.
Okay.
Yes.
Kind of, sort of like in the Christian world here, when we receive the life and love of the Lord, in a way, we do have a service obligation.
Sure, yeah.
But there, it's actually on paper,
right.
I guess. So where did you serve for those 9 years?
Lots of places. I was at Fort Sill in Oklahoma for a lot of the time because that's the home of field artillery. I was in Grafenwehr, Germany. I was at Fort Riley, Kansas, a few places.
Okay. Did you do any preaching in that time?
Yes, most people assume I was a chaplain in the Army, and I never was. But I did a lot of chaplain things, a lot of Bible study leadership, a lot of pastoral counseling, teaching in churches there, but not in an official role as a chaplain.
Do you have any idea, looking back, why God might have put you on that path to be like a chaplain, but not formally in that role?
Well, in a combat unit or a more field-oriented unit, you learn a lot more leadership. You learn a lot more of the military side of things than chaplains do. Chaplains are often in the field with the troops, but it's not the same.
Yes.
So I think spending so much time in Israel, where most everyone has served in the military, it allows me to speak the language better with Israelis.
Yeah. Oh, how about that?
So I think I was going to do the pastor thing at some point in my life, so God had me do something else first.
And do you tell stories from those military years?
Once in a while, yeah. There's quite a few mentions of the Army-Navy game in our church, yeah.
Okay, so we're to 1990. You've finished your military service?
No, 1990 I finished high school. 1994 I finished
I'm
West
sorry,
Point.
that's right. I was on wrong decade.
Yes.
Okay.
1994 finished West Point until 2003. I had done 9 years of active duty time and then reserve time. And during my reserve time, at that latter part of that, is when I went to seminary.
Okay. Okay. So what years? When did you go to seminary?
96 to 99, I was at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth.
Okay.
And then began serving at a church in one of the cities near us in the Dallas area. And came to First Melissa in 2002 and stayed in the reserves till 2003. And it just became too much to try to do that together.
So was First Melissa your first pastoral job?
First senior pastor position, yes.
Okay. Before that, where did you serve?
I served at a church in Plano in our area as an associate pastor. Did a lot of the jobs that you would expect, single adults and college ministry and young adults and missions work and counseling and a lot of the jobs that really helped me a lot. I did a lot of things there that helped me in the beginning of First Melissa because it was a much smaller church with a much smaller staff, so I was doing a lot of things myself.
Yes.
And so it was another example of God's leadership was exactly what I needed it to be.
So how was this idea of this opportunity, or how did it happen that you came to First Melissa?
I was serving at a church again in Plano, another town nearby, and the way Baptist churches do it is they hire their own pastors. They, in a slightly different but similar to a business world, they take resumes and they do interviews and they interview candidates and hopefully led by the Spirit of God throughout the whole process. But there's no headquarters or diocese like other denominations that assign a pastor. They hire their own pastor. And so they were looking for one in 2002, and they asked me to be a candidate for the position. And I said I would be glad to visit with them, and through the Lord's leadership, went there, began there May 1st, 2002.
May 1st, 2002. And just about how big was the church at that point?
Probably about 75 people on a Sunday morning.
Okay.
One service in a building that had been there probably since the 1950s.
So you started in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we're here to talk about Israel.
Sure.
But so let's jump ahead to just before we talk about your first visit. What year was your first visit?
2008.
2002. So we've got 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you just describe a little bit about how you felt God was leading you during those first 6 years of?
The church experienced a lot of growth, a lot of change. We added a lot of new members. We built a couple of buildings along the way. We moved locations. We really tried to do the work of the Lord, to teach the Word. I do a lot of things, but primarily my calling is to be a Bible teacher. And so trying to teach people who Jesus is and the truth of the Scriptures, both Old Testament and New Testament, you can't avoid the topic of Israel, which we'll, I know, talk about a lot. And so we really had a new culture there, a revised culture of the church, and expanded our work around the world, began to support ministries and missionary organizations.
You're talking about even those 6 years before
Sure,
Israel.
Of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It was a beautiful start, and it's been a growth journey ever since.
All right. Well, when we return, we're going to talk. We're going to start with your first visit to Israel, how that happened, and what happened.
Great.
So stay with us, and we'll be back in the next segment. Until then, Bob Odell and for Trey Graham saying shalom.
Shalom, shalom.